Hello and welcome to Tea and Tournaments. My name is Lisette Leberger. I've been part of the SCA for over 20 years and an MOL for almost as long. This series of videos is designed to help people, specifically MOLs and Marshals, run different styles of tourneys at their practices and their events. If you have any questions, my email contacts will be at the end of the video. Today we'll be walking through Bedford Points Tournaments. As always, whenever you're planning a tournament at a practice or at an event, make sure that you communicate thoroughly with your MOLs and your Marshals. Make sure that you are both on the same page on how your tournament is going to run for a smooth day. You need to decide how the pairings are going to be announced, who's going to be reporting those results back to the MOL table, and how are you going to make any sort of adjustments if the number of combatants does not fit your original plan. So make sure that you have talked to your MOL and your Marshal about those, and make sure that the tournament is going to run smoothly. Bedford Points Tournaments are a class of tournaments that are non-elimination in general, meaning that the combatants continue fighting until a predetermined end of the tourney day, whether it's a number of rounds or a specific amount of time. So non-tourneys in general, like I said, they continue until the announced end of the tournament, number of rounds, or a predetermined time. Winners can be determined by total number of points earned by wins, the types of victories that they score, their behavior on field, maybe it's the best death, maybe it's the concert's fever, or any other announced criteria. We use non-elimination tournaments to provide for a fair number of bouts or fights for the entertainment purpose. Maybe it fits into the theme of the event or some other criteria that, having a determined winner is not necessary for the day. Now, there's several different types of non-elimination tournaments. Like I said, we're going to do Bedford Points today, but everybody is or should be familiar with bear pits. There's also pot of arms, hunts. There's also round robins, Swiss 5, dice tourneys, and warlord and ransom tourneys as well. So any of these are considered non-elimination. The warlord is sometimes considered a double elimination, but nobody's actually eliminated. Any of these are fair game as far as non-elimination. Some of these really enhance the theme of an event, depending on how it is used and utilized. So keep these in mind if you are on the planning committee for something, or if you're just curious and you want to try and run some of these at your practice. Now, Bedford Points Tournaments specifically work best for a medium or a large number of participants. We're not talking large as in war numbers, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 60 fighters or so, although that's a pretty big list. Okay, so you do need a fair number of fighters. They're going to get a lot of fights out of this style of tournament. As the participants progress through the rounds, they're going to be matched with several different opponents, generally around their skill set, especially in the later rounds. Now, you are going to need a large list space for a Bedford Points tournament. All of these bouts are running essentially at the same place and time, just spread out all over the field. So you are going to need a fairly large space. Now, each bout is going to consist of 3 passes between the 2 combatants. So it's not necessarily a best of 3, but they are going to have 3 passes. Now, wins, losses, and or double kills are scored for each pass, with the respective totals being reported to the MOL. Now, you may choose to just report the wins and losses to the MOL and let them figure out the points values for that, and that's fine too. But that's something that you also need to decide ahead of time. Now, this tourney style does require index cards. It does involve a little bit of card sorting and a little bit of math. Depending on the size of your list, my suggestion is always to run a Bedford Points with at least 2 MOLs or more if you're not as familiar with it or you anticipate a large crowd, because you're going to need some additional help to help handle all of the required work on the MOL side of the tournament for it to run successfully. Unlike a lot of the other tournament styles that we've talked about or that are available, the Bedford Points Tournament probably is the most intensive for the MOLs, because there is so little bit of background work that has to happen before the next round can go out. So let's get into how all of that works. Now, like I said, for each set of fighters, whenever they go out for their round of Bedford Points, they're going to have 3 passes. Across those 3 passes, there's availability of 10 possible points to be awarded. So let's look at our first scenario. Okay. Velma and Brutus are paired together for the first round. Velma takes the first and the third pass, and Brutus takes the second. So how are we going to award their points? Well, there's 3 passes, and there's 10 possible points. Velma scored 2 wins, Brutus only got 1. So we're going to give Velma the 7 points for her 2 wins, and we're going to give Brutus 3 points for his 1 win. Okay. Now let's look at another one. Fred the Red and Finnegan the Fair meet. Finnegan wins the first 2 passes, and the third pass is not fought. Now, this is a discussion you have to have with your marshal ahead of time. If one of the combatants wins the first 2, do they fight the third? And that's a valid question. I've seen it done both ways. Okay. In this case, because Fred did not win any, he gets 0 points for the round. And Finnegan is going to get all 10. So, like I said, your marshal may decide that they need to fight that third pass, or they may say because Finnegan got the first 2, we'll leave it at that. That's entirely up to you. Like I said, both ways I've seen happen, both ways work. And let's look at one more, and then we'll see how this is all recorded. Now, Dame Daphne and Viscount Vinny meet. They each take a win for pass 1 and 2, and they double kill on the third pass. Now, double kills are something else that your marshal is going to have to address and decide how it's going to be handled before the tournament starts. Okay. Now, the options are the double kill counts as a sort of a win-loss for both people, or it counts for nothing and they have to refight. Either one works. Again, it's up to the marshal and the MOL on how they want to handle that information. In this case, because they each have 1 win from pass 1 and pass 2 respectively, we're going to split the 10 points between the 2 evenly, and Daphne and Viscount Vinny are each going to be awarded 5 points. Okay. So how do we keep track of all of these points? That's where our index cards come in. So to keep track of the points for a Bedford point, you're going to take an index card or a pre-printed Bedford point card, and you're going to make it up for each fighter in your list. Okay? Up at the top, there should be a place for the fighter's name, and you're going to assign them a fighter number. It doesn't have to really mean anything. It's just for tracking purposes for the MOL. Okay? Below that, you're going to decide with your marshal how many rounds is this tournament going to last. You're going to record a spot for each one of the rounds. For each round, you'll need to know who the fighter has fought. So who's Sir Scooby going to fight in the first round? How many points was he awarded? And then you're also going to record a column of the total points as a running total throughout the tournament. Okay. So again, decide with the marshal how many rounds you're going to have, who's reporting it, and how they're reporting it back to the MOL. And one other thing that you have to decide with Bedford Points, because this can be a longer tournament, you also need to discuss with the marshal how you're going to handle fighters who drop out after, say, round 3. Maybe they've had an armor failure, or they were, heaven forbid, injured, and they need to not continue. Well, do we put a bye in their place, and how are those buys going to affect the points totals? Okay, so that is a discussion that you will also have to have for the Marshal. So we have Sir Scooby's card here, and for each round we're going to record his opponent's fighter number. And then we're going to record the number of points that Sir Scooby earned in the round, and then also total up the number of points he's round in the tournament itself. So here I have Velma and Brutus from our earlier example. Again, they have fighter numbers. We've got our tourney card set up for 5 rounds, and we have our 3 columns. So Velma is paired with Brutus. Brutus has a fighter number of 2. So on Velma's card, I'm going to record Brutus's fighter number in round 1. So she fought opponent number 2. I'm going to do the same thing on Brutus's card, except I'm going to record Velma's fighter number. She's number 1, so for round 1, Brutus fought opponent number 1. Again, these numbers are only for MOL, keeping track of who people have fought in previous rounds. The numbers really don't mean anything else. You could use shortened versions of names, but depending on who you have on your list field, that could get complicated as well. That's why I've resorted to numbers or letters. Now, in our example, Velma won 2 of the passes and Brutus got 1. So Velma earned 7 points for round 1. Brutus earned 3. And our total points after round 1 for these two, Velma has 7, Brutus has 3. So let's look at 2 of our other fighters. This time we're going to look at Fred and Finnegan. Okay, Fred fought Finnegan. Finnegan's fighter number is number 4, so I've recorded it on Fred's card. And likewise, I'm going to record Fred's fighter number on Finnegan's card, so 4 and 3. Again, Fred did not win anything, so he got a round of 0. Finnegan took it all, so he has 10 points. We record that over in our total point column, and for these 4 fighters, round 1 is done. Now, once you have completed all of round 1, you'll have these cards with a total number of points on them. Somewhere for the first round, they're going to be somewhere between 0 and 10. Okay. You're going to take those point values and you're going to pair those numbers up with other similar values. So you're going to put, if you have 2 fighters who have 0 points, you're going to pair those together. If you've got 2 fighters with 10 points, you're going to pair those together. So you're going to pair your combatants with opponents with a similar point total. You're going to try to avoid our rematches when you're making those next pairings, and only send your next round to the field when you have paired all of your participants after each round. So you want to send out the entire round all at once. Continue with this process through each one of your rounds until you get to the end of your tournament. And then at the end, your final total points should be used to determine your winner if necessary. Now, there is a possibility of ties, and you'll have to decide with your Marshal how you are going to handle those as well. So just as an example, let's say setting the pairings for round 2. If I've gone through all of our total points for round 1 and I have 10 fighters, and I've listed them here from 10 down to 0 based on what points they earned in round 1. Okay. So we've got Finnegan has 10, Maldor has 7, Velma has 7, Sir Scooby, Duke Scrappy, Viscount Vinny, and Dame Daphne all have 5. Big Ben and Brutus each have 3, and Fred the Red has 0. So again, we're going to try and pair these up with similar point totals. Okay, so we only have one that has 0, and we only have one that has 10, so they're not all going to match up perfectly, but we're going to keep those point totals as close as possible. So starting at the bottom, we're going to take Fred and Brutus, and we're going to pair them together. Moving up, we're going to put Big Ben and Dame Daphne together. Sir Scooby and Viscount Vinny. Now you notice that I skipped over Duke Scrappy, and that's because of the rematch thing. Okay. Duke Scrappy fought one of those two in an earlier round, so I need to avoid that and pair them up differently. So now I'm going to take Duke Scrappy and I'm going to pair him up with Velma because Velma has 7 points. And that gives Maldor and Finnegan the Fair the last pairing. Okay, so you do have to look at that a little bit and see how best to set those pairings. You want to avoid those rematches if possible, and it just depends on how those points come out for each round, how best you're going to be doing that. Now, a couple of things that could happen late in the tournament that you should be aware of and maybe have a plan for addressing. Now, buys can be introduced at any point if a participant can no longer continue, like I said, for an armor failure, fatigue, an injury, any reason at all, they may need to leave the tournament. So you'll have to decide how are you going to handle those. They're going to be replaced with a buy in the tournament because we're pairing everybody up by 2s. Okay, so once that person is gone, we put a buy card in their place. Now, is that buy going to be fought? Is it going to be destructive? What point value should be awarded to the buy's opponent? Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 0, which would put him at a disadvantage? 10 is sometimes too much because they didn't really fight. So again, you're going to have to decide with your marshal what's the best course of action on handling the buys. Also, you may need to do some little finagling to avoid those rematches. Depending on the size of your list and the number of participants, it might be unavoidable, but do try to do your best to avoid those rematches. Like I said, for larger groups, for Bedford Points, it's best to have an MOL or 2 on standby to help fill in if your own team needs a break. This is a more intensive tourney style for the MOLs, and MOL fatigue can happen. So make sure that you've got a couple of people nearby that can help out or give you a break or something along those lines should you need it. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more about how to run a Bedford Points tournament. Again, if you have any questions or concerns or you want to toss around some ideas, you can contact me by email. It's lisette@members.ethelmark.org or lisetteLebergere@gmail.com. And if you're in the area of King's Crossing and you're planning on going to an event, let me know, and hopefully I will see you there. Have a good day.